His Holiness would like to take some questions.
Question.
How do we manage it?
Okay.
So there are 4 mics on the floor.
Each line.
Each line
One
between
from
each.
there. So those people who have some questions.
So people who have questions must come forward to
Tiem cilvēkiem, kuriem ir
stand in
jautājumi,
line.
dodoties pie mikrofoniem.
Thank you.
Paldies.
Da? Start question. No.
Let's start with the
Sāksim
questions.
ar kādiem jautājumiem.
please.
Пожалуйста, начинайте задавать вопросы.
Sākam lūdzu uzdot jautājumus.
День добрый.
Пожалуйста, есть вопросы?
Да, здесь.
И будьте добры, говорите погромче, пожалуйста.
День добрый. Здравствуйте, Ваше Святейшество. От всех буддистов России я бы хотел поблагодарить вас за такую прекрасную возможность увидеться сегодня с вами, присутствовать на сегодняшнем мероприятии.
Vispirms paldies no Krievijas budistiem par iespēju piedalīties šodienas mācībās.
First of all, we would like to thank you for your teachings today. We are very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Сегодня сюда приехали буддисты со всей России.
Šodien šeit ir atbraukuši budisti no visas Krievijas, no Burjatijas, no Kalmikijas, no Tūles, no Jakutijas, no visiem Krievijas reģioniem. Cilvēki ir braukuši tūkstošiem kilometru, lai vienkārši varētu šodien jūs ieraudzīt un šeit būt kopā ar jums.
Today, many Buddhists from all the Buddhist regions of Russia came here. They made a long way, many kilometers, just to see you and be in your presence today.
Но действительно, мы еще раз хотим поблагодарить вас за такую возможность, потому что действительно в Латвию приезжать действительно ближе и дешевле, нежели лететь в Индию.
Mēs tiešām vēlamies pateikties jums par iespēju atbraukt uz Latviju, jo tas ir daudz vienkāršāk un lētāk. Bet tagad jautājums.
Вопрос такой. Да. Как вы относитесь к вегетарианству?
Jautājums ir, kā jūs attiecaties pret veģetārismu?
Really much easier for us to come to Latvia, and my question is, what is your attitude towards vegetarianism? What do you think about being vegetarian? What do you think about people being vegetarians?
Wonderful.
Brīnišķīgi.
Once in Mongolia, I suggested the Mongolian city should drink less vodka.
Reiz
So
Mongolijā es
they
ieteicu,
follow my suggestion.
ka viņam būtu jādzer
And nowadays,
mazāk degvīnu, un tad viņi
I suggested
sekoja manam piemēram.
they should take less meat.
Un tagad es saku viņiem, ka ir jādara mazāk gaļas, jo pārāk daudz Mongolijā ir ar lieko svaru. Un tad es iesaku lietot mazāk gaļu pārtikā.
So vegetarianism, wonderful.
Tā kā veģetārisms ir lielisks.
Next question.
Nākošais jautājums.
Поднимайте, пожалуйста, руку, чтобы вас было видно. Спасибо.
Good afternoon, Your Holiness. It's amazing to have you here, and my question is very simple. There are a lot of thoughts and talks about love and compassion. If compassion is understandable, then what is, from your perspective, is love?
Ir daudz stāstīts par mīlestību un līdzjūtību. Tad, ja ir saprotams, kas ir līdzjūtība, tad kas īstenībā mīlestība. Jāsaka to, ka man izpratne par angļu vārdu nav īsti.
Genuine compassion and love You see, through reasoning, through training,
Īsta mīlestība un līdzjūtība nāk caur pamatotu izpratni.
so there was a biological factor, some kind of love and kindness or compassion.
Bioloģiskie faktori līdzjūtībai, mīlestībai, tie parasti ir ar zināmām sautīgumu, jo mēs attīstam to parasti pret mūsu draugiem.
That kind of biased love and compassion cannot reach your enemy.
Un parasti mūsu līdzjūtība un mīlestība nesniedz pret mūsu ienaidniekiem.
Irrespective of the other sort of attitude, but consider as a human brothers sisters.
Bet patiesa mīlestība un līdzjūtība ir tad, ja mēs visi uztveram kā savus brāļus, māsas, kā līdzvērtīgas būtnes.
Now, actually, it exists among the hospital. When some patient come,
un to mēs varam vērot arī, piemēram, slimnīcās.
Or the sort of concerned sort of official never ask what is your nationality.
Kad pacienti ierodās slimnīcā, tad ārsts nejautā, kāda ir jūsu reliģija vai kāda ir jūsu izcelšanās un tā tālāk. Viņi vienkārši jūs ārstē kā slimnieku.
Kanda chod risu machebe chambat zawa sa ti samudane gyumje samudane gale lo khomna yongtyachi chartoga. So there is two kinds of love and compassion. One biased,
Ir divi veidi līdzjūtība un mīlestība.
about others' attitude. The second one, unbiased.
Tā, kas ir nepiesārņota, to mēs varam attīstīt.
Irrespective whether their attitude towards you positive or negative, irrespective, still there are human brothers, sisters, or other sort of animal. They want happy life.
Mums jāatcerās, ka ikviena būtne, cilvēki, dzīvnieki, neviens nevēlas ciest, visi vēlas būt laimīgi. Un, ja ir mūsu spēkos, tad mums ir jāpalīdz viņiem, ja nē, tad vismaz jācenšas viņiem nekaitēt.
I think that kind of compassion only we human being can develop.
Un man šķiet, ka tikai mēs kā cilvēki varam attīstīt nesautīgu, īstu līdzjūtību mīlestību, jo bioloģiskā līmeņa līdzjūtība ir nosacīta.
Sort of feeling of compassion is very much mixed with attachment.
Un šī pieķeršanās bioloģiskā līmenī ir saistīta ar pieķeršanos. Un pārāk daudz pieķeršanās vienmēr iet roku rokā ar naidu. Tāpēc īsta līdzjūtība ir pilnīgi atšķirīga no pieķeršanās. Nākošais jautājums.
Do you need translation? Okay.
Следующий вопрос, пожалуйста.
Ваше Святейшество, еще раз большое спасибо за то, что есть такая возможность приехать сюда. Мы приехали из Санкт-Петербурга, и мой вопрос следующий. Вы часто говорите о несектарном подходе в практике буддизма. Вы могли бы, но, к сожалению, мы часто встречаемся с такой проблемой, что, например, последователи школы Гелуг и школы Нигма, скажем так, возникают некоторые разночтения, иногда даже конфликты. Вот вы могли бы пояснить, что на самом деле, наверное, разницы особой нет, чтобы вот как-то это все, скажем, разрешить вот эти споры и чтобы все находились в гармонии. Спасибо большое.
Jautājums ir par to, ka viņa svētība bieži stāsta par nesektantisku pieeju mācībām, bet mēs varam sastapties ar to, ka ir, piemēram, dialogu tradīcijas sekotāji, ir citu tradīcijas sekotāji, un praksē dzīvē gadās, ka rodas domstarpības. Tad kā jūs ieteiktu pārvarēt šīs savstarpējās nesaskaņas un kā būt saskaņā vienam ar otru?
Pekiada, Shogun, not to shooting Kadula, Melabuchuan. Temper Chizen said, but Chibina, Shasha Yosha, Yamari. The Consanko, Zankan, Dragadulia, Bena, Nima Chashana, get all the Oche, and get all the Lamde, such a Chashana. The good among Dejo.
Es nedaudz jau ieskicēju sākumā šo tēmu, un katrām no šīm tradīcijām ir mazliet citi uzsvari, teksti un pieejas. Dzogchen praksē piemēram ati-joga, un Nyingmas praktizē visu ceļu no sākuma līdz galam pakāpeniski. Un kopumā ir 9 ceļi. Pirmie 3 ved pa 4 cēlajām patiesībām, un tad ir 3 ārējās un 3 iekšējās tantras. Un tantrās ir Maha, Anu un Ati tantra. Un iekšējā tantrā ir 8 herukas prakses. Un tantriskās prakses ir slepenās prakses. Un tās ir domāts īpaši attīstītiem individiem.
실기 바로도 침으로 쏘고 지대주 슝드들이 도셔 슝들이 담바 지sen지 자 디리 인도산에 네 벌금네 날렌데 취주 다 와셔야 돼 디샤야 그 좀전디 응 변호 사제 샤샤나 브로바로 토르 사제 남제 브로바 내전 쇼용 날렌데 개발 님은 샤샤 그주 샤샤나 मनमें था सुनचेने, ऐने मारबा लजालिया, क्या पेंजे मंगू यारे लामा पेंजे मंगू यारे तो तो नारो बरे, नालेंजे पेंजे चंकु सुनी बये, दा निकालेसो, kadam शासन चोचिचेने,
and then in the kadam. In the case of Kadam, it started with that of Master Atisha. And then in the case of Kagyu and the Geluk tradition, we also follow the Kadam tradition, and therefore and then also Janang. And all these Tibetan Buddhist traditions, although were termed as Lamaism, but we all follow the Nalanda, Sakya, Nyingma, Kagyu, Gelug, and Jonang. All of them are followers of the same teachings that have come to us through those of the masters of Master Nagarjuna and his disciples, as well as Asanga and his disciples. So we have the same tradition of the Nalanda monastic tradition. Otherwise, saying that we are following this and that tradition, which mainly have to do with the tantric teachings. I mean, if we make discrimination, it's not good. It's very unfortunate. And so today, in the case of the Shia and Sunni, for example, in the Islam tradition, there is lots of conflict. It is very sad. And in the case of the Tibetans saying we are follower of this tradition, that tradition, and causing lots of discrimination, it's very sad.
И в городе Москве существует много общин по буддизму. Ваше Святейшество, я здесь. И в этой связи вопрос такой, хочу получить ваш совет. У нас так недавно изменилось законодательство, и разным общинам и буддийским организациям стало очень сложно практиковать и отправлять культы и ритуалы. То есть фактически деятельность буддийских организаций наших приравнена к миссионерских и запрещена вне специальных учреждениях, то есть как храм. В городе Москве нет такого храма и никогда не было. Существует множество общин, но они, к сожалению, не могут никак объединиться, чтобы, наконец, хотя бы единственный храм был построен. Хотя у всех других конфессий храм есть в городе Москве. Прошу дать ваш совет, как нам это сделать, как нам осуществить вот эту, так сказать, возможность, да, и официально практиковать буддизм в соответствии с нашим законодательством. Долгих вам лет, спасибо.
Your Holiness, the question is from Moscow. Moscow has many different Buddhist groups and organizations, but Moscow doesn't have a Buddhist temple. And the gentleman says that according to the recent changes to the Russian law, it is now very difficult to practice any religion if you don't have an official building, a temple. But Moscow cannot build a temple, a Buddhist temple, because there is no harmony and there is no common decision between these different groups. What would you advise to us so that we can build this temple and practice Buddhism openly?
I think my advice is, I don't know.
Mums ir, diemžēl, es nezinu.
Usually,
So usually, of course, I don't need to say anything about Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, but even the Himalayan monasteries in the Himalayan region, the texts that we study, amongst them, not only contains the practice of a religion, or maybe I shouldn't say like that, but with regard to the practice of the teaching of the Buddha, since we need to use reason to make transformation within ourselves, therefore, with regard to the reasons that we resort to, and what we need to understand is that the transformation is made within the mind, and there are lots of philosophical teachings for that purpose. Although these philosophies are taught in the Buddhist literature, but we could actually take them out of this literature and say, not without saying that this is a Buddhist philosophy as such, but as a philosophy. We could, from amongst the 300 volumes of Kangyur, the words of translation of the words of the Buddha, and the Tengyur, we could actually extract material for which concern with science, mainly about emotions and mind. And then there's the philosophical concept as the second aspect that we can extract from this is philosophy, which, for example, in the case of the two truths, then conventional ultimate truth, they don't necessarily have to be Buddhist idea as such. When it comes to, of course, teaching about the Four Noble Truths, then we can actually talk about them being the teaching of the Buddha. And so, with regard to philosophy, there is the which can also be extracted from these texts, and then there's the third content, which is the religion. And so, the science segment on science or material on science, and then the content regarding philosophy. We have put together, compiled books on science that from this literature, and then philosophy as well. And so these are ready in Tibetan, but they are being translated into other languages like English and so forth. And so whether the big monasteries, whether they are big or small, the monasteries and nunneries in the Himalayan regions, they should use these books for study of Buddhist science and philosophy, and science and philosophy. And so many monasteries are taking interest in it, and even the school children are being taught these subjects. And some schools even have, when we hold debates and discussions amongst the school children, there are even Muslim children who have studied these. And so these are academic subjects and not so much religious subjects. So in your case also, it's not enough just to have monks in your monasteries who say some rituals and prayers, but of course these are should be done by the monks in the monasteries. But the monastic institutions need to become like an institution for learning philosophy, which is common to all the different schools, and also science. So in Moscow, if you could start a center like that, it's like it should be an academic center as opposed to being religious. And so the monks who are here, it's your responsibility to help with that. And of course, monasteries may be used for, people usually think about monasteries being places for saying prayers and meditation and so forth, but the monastic institutions should be used as a center for learning for people, so that you could also hold religious gatherings of different religious traditions. As I talked this morning, I work hard to create religious harmony amongst the different religions. So these monasteries that you have could also be used as a place for gathering many different religious traditions, and scholars from these traditions should actually discuss amongst themselves what are the differences, what are the commonalities, and then what are the purposes of these different differences and so forth. So if you could actually consider this, it would be very good. Otherwise, the monastery would be just used for some prayers, and some of the things, our habits, Tibetan Buddhist habits are quite drawbacks.
Next question.
So, oh.
Zağadı, manasitklegi, monasterlegi tangı gega uruladı, madında uha zağat, madında buddan nomu zağdırdı. Oda tandı neretçi şülgen умшакар седженев. Я, Ваше Высочество, мы прибыли из Калмыцкой республики, чтобы выразить вам свою благодарность, чтобы вы знали, что калмыцкий народ всегда ждет вас, всегда помнит вас, и в сердце, и в душе, и в голове всегда мы держим ваши поучения, ваше наставление. Я из Калмыкии прибыл народный поэт Владимир Нуру. Хочу зачесть свое стихотворение, посвященное вам на родном языке. Урухым бакшин, егана далаламды, уддан омин, әруінді күріксін, Бурухым бакшин, гегендан мөрги, зурға зөйлен сәкүсін болсын, зуынқа гегені әдісті күрті, егіл күн сеткілден сүмі, әнін асындан тасқасын болқыла, Зүрхэн болгоор хараа нурж сүлгэн олж авахын лавта бурхан багшийн гэрэл сэрэл
I think short.
Будут алражы
Shorter.
Итэн тарна Сүмі болгоор сүзэг амлаар сүрийн дөнгөр сансыр секна бурхан багшийн
I think this is not time for reading poems.
Простите,
Just
пожалуйста.
question.
У нас нет времени слушать длинные стихи.
Мы бы хотели увидеть вас в Республике Калмыкия. Будет ли такая возможность?
Your Holiness, this is a poet from Kalmykia Republic. He was wishing you long life and wanted to express how deep you are in the minds and hearts of the Kalmyk people. And he requests you please come to Kalmykia.
Ваше Святейшество, доброго вам дня и долгих лет жизни. Радуйте нас подольше. Волнуют два простых вопроса. Едите ли вы сами мясо и как вы относитесь к цветочным магазинам? Ведь у цветов тоже есть душа, а для цветочных магазинов миллионы цветов в мире уничтожаются ежедневно. Благодарю.
Regarding myself, my story, when I was 13 or 14, 15 years of age, during some government festivals, we used to have lots of meat in our meals. And so at that time, in those years, I actually banned that, stopped the non-vegetarian meals at formal festivals. And then in 1959, I came to exile in India, and then in 1964, I gave up non-vegetarian meal. And so for the next 20 months at that time, I became sick. I had this jaundice and so it seems that since that time, I had there was this gallstones building up in my bile, gallbladder, and then some years ago, I had to remove the gall bladder. And so at that time in 1964, after those 20 months, after consulting my doctors, I was actually advised to go back to my original diet by my doctors, both the Tibetan traditional doctor and allopathic doctors. And then in our big monastic institutions, monastic universities, the monks are not served, and from their common kitchen, not served non-vegetarian. And then also in the schools, and also in our Tibetan settlements in India, in exile, we didn't start poultry farming, and then right from the beginning, or fishery and pig farm and so forth. And therefore, we were concerned about the taking life of other sentient beings. Although there were offers to help from some benefactors to start these farms. But we didn't accept those offers. But with regards to the flowers, in India, in the Indian philosophical school, for example, Jainism, it is said that these plants have also life. Of course, they have life. But in any case, the Buddhist monks are not allowed to cut grass and plants, and they are growing, and without any purpose and reason. The monks are not allowed to cut plants and flowers and so forth. During the summer times, of course, the things grow. But if we have to really say that these plants have mind or conscious, it would be difficult. In Jainism, there is this saying that the plants also have mind. But in Buddhism, we don't accept that. So if we look even at the mountains, of course, we can't see real obvious changes within some years, but after centuries, then we may be able to see changes happening in them. So that also could, if we accept plants having mind, they could also be said to have mind, but that's not possible.
Our children wonder if Dalai Lama can be reborn as a woman, as a female being.
So about 15 years ago, in Paris, one time, one women's magazine journalist, editor or somebody, I met a lady I met there, she asked me if it's possible for Dalai Lama, a female Dalai Lama could be possible. So I said that's possible. And even in Tibetan, if I said that if, of course, if a women Dalai Lama could be more helpful to the people, that would be possible. And in fact, in Tibetan history, about 700 years ago, there was, since that time, there has been reincarnation of something Doje Pagmo, who was a female reincarnate Lama. She is considered really holy, and she was someone who, in the beginning, became a Lama by her own effort. And then in India also there was the Bhikshuni Lakshmi, and amongst the 80 Mahasiddhas of India, some of them were women. And so the main reason, which I actually tell in the world, around the world where I go, in the past there were very few human beings in the world, and whatever they got, they actually used them as a community together without this possessiveness, feeling of this is mine, this is mine. But as number of human population grew, and then particularly once human beings started agriculture, and then there goes the harvest, then people started stealing and conflict started, and therefore people thought of having a leader who would actually control the community in a certain community, in a certain land. And so the concept of leadership came. So this didn't exist in the beginning. And at that time, education had no role, but the leadership, the qualification for leadership was physical strength, and therefore the man leading or becoming a leader started, and therefore man dominance started then, and that seems to have called male dominance seems to have crept into the religious study, religious institutions as well, and therefore while both men and women can be fully ordained monks and nuns within the Buddhist tradition, but irrespective of whether the nun is senior or the monk is junior, that nuns are said to, or discipline, or the women have to sit below the men. But as education started, then even now today in this world, there had been, because of education, many countries have and had called women leaders. And so education gives us equal opportunity. But today, in today's time, the world is lacking in love and compassion. We are not lacking in any other things like our wealth and education, but love and compassion. And so at such a time, as I said this morning, it is important, as I said this morning also, it's important to have the education on love and compassion. And therefore, we need to have some program and for the promotion of love and compassion. And for that, women naturally, biologically, are most sensitive, have the greater sensitivity to others' pain. This is what the scientists, through their experiments and research, say these days. And therefore, in order to promote love and compassion, women need to take active role, use their potential, and to promote love and compassion in the world today. And therefore, in under such circumstances, if Dalai Lama, a women Dalai Lama could be, Dalai Lama could be more of a greater service to humanity in this project, then of course women Dalai Lama is possible. But whether the Dalai Lama institution remains or not, as early as 1969, formally, I have mentioned that whether this institution continues or not will be decided by the Tibetan people. If the Tibetan people, which the Dalai Lama institution, of course, has been here in existence for several centuries now. If the Tibetan people decide it's no more necessary, then of course this will not continue. I have no concern about that. Whether if it's beneficial, then it will continue. If it's not, then it won't. Some people think that Dalai Lama institution is something very important, almost like indispensable for the Tibetan culture. The institution itself started only about about 600 years. And then the Dalai Lama is becoming both the leader of the spirituality and temporal leadership started only about 4 centuries ago. And many of the Indian masters, the great masters, have no. The institution came into being after becoming the Tulku institution started in Tibet. Of course, in India, nobody realized or recognized as a Tulku, reincarnations. But even amongst the Tibetan Tulkus or incarnations, many are very beneficial, but there are Tulkus who are disgraced to their predecessors. So there is a saying that when a child was recognized as a reincarnate Lama, everything looks so grand because there are grand ceremonies for the enthronement of the person. But then when they actually become disgraced, then it's a shame. And so I consider it more important for the Tulkus, whether they are Tulkus, somebody is recognized as Tulku or not, it's important for them to have education.
지금 소수 가다 라마 가서 라마 기시지 기루 그러지게는
So if some lama or geshe has many students, for example, and the students actually ask for the reincarnation of that lama to be recognized, this is something of a thinking or mentality of the old society, and this is not necessary.
Okay, now stop.
Все, вопросы на сегодня закончены. Завтра вопросы продолжим.
Now tomorrow.
Следующая сессия вопросов и ответов завтра. Спасибо.
Oh yeah. 다들이다. 자상가 나도 최든 직대 가르더리네.
So whether whatever we talk about, whether it's temporal or mundane or religious, we need to be realistic. And without being realistic, you may have a good heart, but you won't be able to achieve your goal. If you understand the reality, be realistic, then you'll be able to achieve your goal realistically. And achieving your goal cannot just happen merely aspiring on something. So you need really to gain conviction through using your logic and gaining inference to the reality of things in order to have good result of your own aspirations. And therefore, valid cognition is very important, as it in the So what is to be adopted or what is to be discarded, that verse, I don't know which number it is, but that the verse starting with those lines are very important. So the person himself or herself must do investigation into the things, and we need to engage in the process of learning or studying the things, and then reflect on it again and again and gain the understanding based on reflection. So first gain understanding based on your study, learning. And then through the reflection and gaining conviction, so of course when we talk about and then we need to relate those points in our own meditation, whether we talk about the shamatha meditation or what. We need really to gain the experience of those teachings. So everything has to get back to our empirical experience and end. And therefore, the Buddha himself first engaged in the study of the Dharma, and then he reflected on it, and then entered into the meditation, and thereby finally he entered into the path, and then from his own experience he is able to teach others, and therefore he is someone who is reliable in terms of his teaching from his own experience. And therefore, this is also relates to the that of and then with regard to the Buddha having become a reliable guide, the Pramanavarttika says that in order to refute this thesis that he was not born from causes and conditions, and so this relates to the theistic religious traditions where they say that everything is created by God, and but the Buddha is not like that. But and so in the case from the point of Buddhism, if you were to posit such a being who is permanent and right from the beginning, someone enlightened and so forth, then that God, the Creator, is also said to be the producer or the originator of everything. And if that were the case, then it is said and argued that the things which have actually come as His creation cannot have any change. And so that's because if the cause itself cannot change in any way, the result or the effect of it cannot have any change. And therefore, the Buddha was someone who went through the process of learning, reflecting, and then the meditation. So in this way, he gave teaching to his disciples from his own experience, and therefore it is said that he became a reliable guide or an authority. And
so that any doesn't jugoda, Jigi Kavar, Tangazo, the Kunjo Yebe Drujilia, that Chipanamado, the Chakora, a Cero, Niazen Yedava.
So with regards to the verse number 10, it says those produced sequentially cannot possibly be produced from a permanent thing. A permanent So in the case of the Charvaka school of thought, they have actually said that things have no causes, but they appear or they arise by chance. They have given 10 different reasonings. But if you look at our own body, for example, we can see that when some part of our organ is hurt, or it actually hurts others as well, affects others. And so and from this verse down, there are many different reasons that are given. The different non-Buddhist traditions, their assertions are given in these stanzas from stanza number 10 and down. Of course, if you are not able to, if you don't actually know those positions and assertions of the non-Buddhist traditions, the objection or refutation of them may not be understood well, and therefore you may be able to say something about them, but you won't be able to give the details of their thesis. And so, as it is said in the Pramanavarttika, if you lack the knowledge of something which is hidden, then since you do not have the knowledge, you cannot teach others. So in Pramanavarttika, there is also a refutation of the body being the cause of our mind. Although there are refutations of the Charavaka, this has to do with the Charavaka's position, who say that the body is the cause of our consciousness or mind. And of course, they were not really going into the details of the brain and the neurons and so forth as such, but just the body itself. And so, but today, scientists really explain on the basis of the neurons of different parts of the brain, going into the amygdala, which is called cause for some emotions and so forth. So I feel that because of this detailed explanation of the scientists these days, we really need to think more detail about how, the refutations found in Pramanavarttika. Because the sensory perceptions, it's very clear that the sensory perceptions are somehow related to our brain, the neurons, the different parts of the... When some part of the brain is damaged, it also affects our senses. And then the coarser levels of our mind, mental consciousness, is also related to our brain. So these kind of mental states of mind have to do or are related to the sensorial experiences, of course. But there are those of the subtler states of mind, which is, for example, the dream state, and then there is the deep sleep, and then also the coma state, when people are said to be in a coma sort of state. They are subtler still. And then the subtlest level of mind is explained very clearly in the tantric text. And so we have within the mind, the mental consciousness, there is the degree of subtlety that and then in the case of the elements from which the different elements evolving from one from the other, such as the wind energy, then the fire, then water, and then the earth. And then when they dissolve, the earth dissolves into water, that into fire, and that into wind. And so this is the description of this evolutionary process of the elements or the universe is similar to the theory of Big Bang. So the universe is said, scientists explain the universe originating from the Big Bang and then finally going back into it. And so in the case of the Buddhist literature, there is this explanation of how from the wind energy comes the different other elements, and the whole galaxy also seems to be ruled by that principle of the evolution and the dissolution process. And so, on the whole, we can say that this is described, the evolution and the dissolution described in our text, is similar to what the scientists explain. So, just as this evolutionary process and the dissolution process happens in the external world, this happens also within the human being, within a sentient being. And within the sentient being, an extra element is that of the consciousness. And consciousness in the dissolution process finally is said to dissolve back into the space. Here, and unlike the external space, it is the space within the mind. As long as the 80 conceptions are there, As long as the 80 conceptions are there, then the coarser level of mind also persists. And then when it is said that the space and dissolves into the consciousness dissolves into space, I mean, there is the subtle state of mind, and so within that space there are the 4 degrees of subtlety within the subtle mind. And so we go through the process of dissolution where the 80 conceptions dissolve into the whitish appearance, those dissolve into the reddish increase, and that dissolves into the near attainment blackish, and then that dissolves into the all empty state. And so just as there is this evolutionary process in the external world, likewise there is this evolutionary process in the within the sentient being. And then at the time of the death, the clear light of state, at which stage the person is, or the being is not yet dead, but dying, going through the dying process. And so at that stage there is this clear light state of mind. And in the last over 50 years in our exile life, there have been many people who died and who actually stayed in some kind of a meditative state. And during that period of time, the body of the person who is clinically dead, and of course, remained very fresh. My own abbot for my monastic bhikshu ordination, my abbot Ling Rinpoche, the Vajradhara Ling Rinpoche, stayed in that state for 13 days. And there have been there have been many other people who have actually stayed in that state of clear light. This is a phenomenon which the scientists are not able to explain yet. When when a person is dying, what happens is the blood circulation stops because the heart stops pumping, and therefore the blood doesn't go into the brain, and then there is brain death. And so the person is considered to be a corpse. But even after that state of clinical death, for several months, weeks, 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, I mean, the body of the person still remains fresh. Some people, before they die, before they go through this dissolution process, they were very weak physically. But once they start staying in this state, the phenomenon called Thugdam, the body becomes very fresh. So there have been such cases. And so some of my friends, scientists, have started some project to actually research this phenomenon of Thugdam. So clinically the people are dead, but the body still remains fresh. So how does that happen? In order to explain the scientists are actually using different instruments. So they use these electrical wires that are put on the head of the person who is clinically dead, and then when these the wires were put on their head, in some cases there have been some signal that something had happened, and so in our text there is these different degrees of subtlety within the mind, and therefore mind still seems to be working at that. And then there are people who remember their past lives. This happens because there is something to be remembered. And in my own case, I know some Indians, children, women, the girls, who were very clearly, remembering their past life. They remembered the parents and relatives, names of the parents and their relatives of their past life, and were able to actually remember their house of the past life. And in India, in Kanpur, one happened in Kanpur, and then other girl was from Patiala. So this girl from Kanpur, central India, the person, the previous life, died quite young, and therefore her predecessor in the previous life had the parents of that life, previous life, were also alive. Therefore, she had 4 parents: two parents from this life and 2 from the previous life. And so, regarding myself, I seem to have remembered some of my past life. And my mother told me some stories that I was able to remember my past life. And but today I am even not able to remember what happened yesterday. And so when in our childhood, what happens is the past life memory is quite clear. And as the body grows and the experiences of this life take over and become stronger and stronger, the past life memory seems to decline and then fade. And then some of my friends who meditate, Dzogchen meditators, told me that when the grosser level of their mind kind of subsides and the subtle mind manifests, they were able to remember their past life. Usually, in their normal life, they were not able to remember their past life. But when they were able to sit in single-pointed concentration, meditation, and the active coarse level of mind becomes rather dominant, and the subtle mind becomes manifest, they were able to remember. Then I have some American friends who are able to stay focused in single-pointedly in meditation for 3 hours at a stretch or so. And so there are some scientists who say that there is this phenomenon of consciousness which is different from the brain. Classical scientists, of course, didn't believe in a mind separate from the brain. And now the scientists are able to saying these days that there's something that can actually affect the mind, the brain, I'm sorry. And when I have discussions with scientists, I ask them, given the situation where the womb of a mother is perfect, without any defect, and then the sperm and the ovum are also perfect, and when these 2 seeds come together, is it necessarily the case that the conception will take place? I asked them, and they said no. So even when all these conditions, the womb, the uterus of the mother, and then the father's seed and the mother's seed are without any defect, and they come together, the conception still is questionable. So why? So the scientists explain on the basis of chromosome, and even twins have different structures of the chromosomes, and so if Master Dhammakirti was still alive and have some discussion on with the neuroscientists I mean, he might have to say that, oh, wait a minute, I have to really think over this. So I just had this thought. So in the text, there is a refutation of the body being the course or the course of our mind, as if it's very easy to do away with. And then some scientists are quite stubborn. Once in my meeting with scientists, I told in the meeting that of course when we have some physical problem, injury or some discomfort in the body, then it actually affects our mind. That's quite obvious to us. But when we are very still, without moving our body, no problem in the body, but calmly sitting there, in such a situation, because of certain emotion or certain thought that happens because of some past life, past memory, it affects our mind, our emotions. And so this is something that happens, isn't it? I asked, and the scientist said, it seems to be true, but it cannot be. Because this is why he said this is because the scientist was not, actually was someone who rejects any notion of consciousness apart from the brain. And then in 1979, I met some Russian scientists, and during my first visit to Moscow. And then when my explanation, I talked about the sensory perceptions, and then I touched on the sixth, the mental consciousness, the sixth mind, and immediately they said, "Oh, this is not possible. This is religious matter." So there are some scientists like that. So when they talk about the sense perceptions, this is something that they think are something obvious. But when we talk about the sixth sense, the mind, then they reject it. Perhaps they actually thought that I was talking about soul. Of course, in Buddhism, we reject the existence of soul. But we are talking about the senses, the consciousnesses. For example, the visual sense faculty, and a meeting with that of the visual object gives rise to the consciousness, the visual consciousness, because of which is in turn conditioned by that of the what is known as the immediately preceding condition, that is a previous moment of the mind or the consciousness itself. And so there are differences in the presentation of mind or consciousness. Some schools of thought talk about 8 different types of consciousness. So in other words, the Dharmakirti says that the mind does not come from the body. So according to our own system, what is a reliable person or a pramana being, what should he be like? So someone whom we rely on is not someone who can show miracles, but someone who is able to teach us what are to be avoided or discarded in our practice, and what are to be adopted, from the coarse to the subtle to the subtlest level of these. So Master Nagarjuna says that the elimination of karma and delusions is there is by eliminating them there is liberation, and karma and delusions come from our inappropriate mentation, and these in turn come from the fabrications and so forth. And so the fact that we talk about how to overcome these negative emotions and what causes negative emotions and our pains and so forth has to do with our own experience of pain and pleasure. And therefore, the teacher here who has to be reliable one, an authority on these, has to be someone who can teach us without mistake the subtle workings of the mind and what are to be adopted and what are to be discarded. And regarding and so, regarding someone having become a reliable person, what caused him to become a reliable authority is said by verse number 34, if the numbering is same. So this person is not someone who is permanently knowledgeable about everything as such, but having gone through the training of mind and having overcome all the defects and all the faults within oneself, and also realized all the experiences of the purification of negativities and knowledge of all. So what makes someone become like that is, Master Dharmakirti says, is because of the meditation and cultivation over many eons, the great compassion. So great compassion becomes the reason for that person to become a reliable authority. And so when moved by that, then one trains oneself over a long period of time on cherishing others over oneself and seeing the faults of self-cherishing attitude. And in the Master Nagarjuna's precious garland, it is mentioned that if you wish enlightenment for oneself and others, one should develop compassion, bodhicitta, and the non-dual wisdom, and then the great compassion. And Master Nagarjuna says, may I be an object of enjoyment for called sentient beings like those of the earth and so forth. And may I hold others to be dear as my life, and may I even hold them dearer than my life, and whatever negativities of others, may they ripen upon me, and may my virtues ripen upon others. And as long as even called any sentient being is remained in the samsara, may I remain in samsara for that person, even if I become enlightened. And so this kind of courage comes, and bodhicitta comes through with the root of great compassion, and therefore you have this determination to work for other sentient beings from life after life and for eons and eons. And so through that kind of training, what you gain or achieve in the end is that of omniscient state of Buddhahood. And therefore, this verse the reason is that of compassion, the familiarization with compassion. And then there is this refutation or objection from the others. Who say that this is not possible. Someone familiarizing with the, compassion, for example, over a long period of time for eons and is not possible. For example, in the case of Charvakas, they do say that because this life, they only believe in one life, and this one life is, in this one life, we have a consciousness or a mind. This mind itself is based on the body. And therefore, how can there be life after life? And so, because they don't believe in the life after life, they say so. And therefore, Master Dharmakirti goes into this argument for past and future lives. He proving that past and future lives are do exist. And so, to sum up what he says, as I said earlier, the doctors say that just because the two seeds of the father and mother come together, conception in the mother's womb is not guaranteed. And therefore, there must be a third case, third factor, which could cause the conception. And therefore, we say that there is the Bardo being in this intermediate state, which actually conceives in the womb. So this Bardo being is also termed in as the smell eater, and so that is attracted. So with regards to the mind, this has to be explained on the basis of the mind, and therefore, since the mind changes, it shows that it has come through causes, and therefore, the being who conceives in the mother's womb must have a previous moment of its consciousness, which is about to conceive in the womb. So, of course, this can be, this is possible to explain on the basis of the memory. So this shows there is a consciousness. So when there is a change in the consciousness, it shows that it's subject to change because of causes and conditions, and therefore it is impermanent. And therefore, within the cause, there is a substantial cause and the cooperative condition. Even in the external world, we can talk about the substantial cause of a flower with the help of sunlight, manure, water, and so forth. And then the different colors of the flowers also have are called the results of the different manures and the fertilizer and so forth that are used as well. But when it comes to talking about the substantial cause, it is this seed of the flower, and that seed itself comes from another flower that preceded it. And then if we trace the substantial continuity of the substance of that seed, it has come from Big Bang time. So even with regard to our body, the subtlest particles, if we were to trace the continuity of these subtle particles, they also come from Big Bang. And even before Big Bang, when there was the empty space, there is the space particle. And with that space particle also have their own continuity in a space before, and particles before that. And therefore, the Big Bang also could have come from its own causes. And therefore, in the 400 verses, it is said that when you look at the beginning of these particles, and there is no beginning, we cannot actually pinpoint something as a beginning. So the physical objects must have their own homogeneous cause, which are physical particles. So likewise, just as physical things have their own substantial cause, which are physical substances, likewise the consciousness must have its substantial cause, which is not physical or matter, but a consciousness. If you posit matter as the first moment of a consciousness or cause, then the consciousness has to, consciousness, there has to be a matter. And so just this is not possible. And so just as the external material things come from their own homogeneous causes, likewise the consciousness also comes from its own homogeneous cause. In Pramanavarttika, somewhere later, it says the things which are not consciousness cannot be a substantial cause of consciousness, and therefore the substantial cause of a consciousness must be something which is similar to the consciousness in type. And therefore, when you trace the continuity, the past continuity of the consciousness, you come to the previous life. And in the Pramanavarttika, there's also the use of the logic that our breath and the faculties and so forth also have their continuity in the past life. But that could be quite problematic if we bring in the question of the formless realms. And there are many arguments to against the non-Buddhist traditions. And then there is also the text deals with the question of last moment of Arahant. And in the Madhyamaka tradition or system, this Arahant completely ceasing to exist is not accepted. So there's nothing much that I can explain from verse 35 or and there are arguments from the non-Buddhist traditions who say that when our health is good, we have pleasure, and then when pleasant experiences of mind, when our body declines, that also causes us displeasure and unpleasant experiences. To say that the mind is a product of the body. And to go back to the Pramana Samuchaya, so to go through the Pramana Samuchaya itself, I don't know, we have the text. Since the potential of the consciousness is definite, Therefore, one moment of consciousness comes from the next, the previous, and so forth. So, though differences are made through familiarization, just as the water is heated with fire, even though it says, what it mentions is that even though there is past and future lives, the argument here is that it is not possible to familiarize, to accustom oneself for a long time, and then one's experience becomes something that is limitless. So this is not possible. Because even if you do some exercise, you cannot, your skill cannot become something that is infinite. And then when a water is boiled, and it's boiled, so much, then what happens is that it evaporates, and then no more water is left. Therefore, the argument is that there is no limitless increase of one's experience. Like these examples, for example, in the case of attachment and anger, we cannot talk about these increasing infinitely. So these are being answered. So it is said that one's skill of jumping and also the warmth of the water and so forth, because they are reliant on a basis which is coarse. If you were to train for some skill, for example, jumping, the jumpers has to exercise, physically do exercise. Even if they have trained for some time and become excellent in jumping and so forth, if they leave this exercise, if they stop exercising, then their skill also declines. And in order to come back to the same level of skill, they need to train physically. But in the case of training the mind, once you have trained for something and you have actually become stable, you have reached the stability of the training, and then you don't need to put extra effort further like you have to do in the case of the physical exercise. Whereas, if you, for example, if you do some exercise of the eye faculty, there's nothing like, we cannot say anything like, these can increase in its ability infinitely. But when it comes to talking about clairvoyance, you may be able to talk about these increasing infinitely because they have as their basis the mind itself. And therefore, the mind can increase in its ability to know things, to understand things infinitely. And then there is the question whether there is an end of the consciousness. In certain philosophical schools within the Vaibhashikas, there is the saying that is, after becoming an arahat, someone who has reached nirvana, and when someone dies, there's nothing more left of that person, consciousness or body or anything. Everything of that person goes out of existence. Whereas in other traditions, it is said that the mind itself cannot become non-existent. In the case of Nagabodhi's, one of his writings, he said that as long as there are three visions of whitish appearance and so down to the blackish near attainment remains, and you will not reach the Buddha state of Buddhahood. But as these three, as you become called absent of these three visions, then your mind will become a Buddha's mind. And therefore, the reason for the consciousness to go into that Buddha's mind, there are three. One is that the basis, the support or the basis of the mind is stable. And then the second reason is that once you have familiarized with certain practice, then you have become familiarized in it, then you don't need extra training to reach that state again. And so it is similar to, going through the school system, where once some student has learned something, and the knowledge has become stable. I mean, it remains in the person without having to put extra effort to learn it again. And therefore, this shows the stability of the support. So, although this is not something which is said in the Pramanavarttika, but if I take the stuff from the Madhyamaka philosophy, Madhyamaka literature, it is said that just as all other faculties, sense faculties or sense spheres are permeated by our bodily sense faculty, likewise confusion or ignorance permeates all other negative emotions. And therefore, this ignorance serving as the cause, you have the coarser level of grasping at some self. And so there are those negative emotions such as grasping at some coarser self of a person, which comes as a result of this ignorance, whereas there are other negative emotions such as attachment and anger and so forth, which go concomitant with this ignorance. And so the coarser level of negative emotions depend on this subtle the confusion or ignorance, whereas the subtle negative emotions like attachment and anger go in concomitant with them. And therefore, since this ignorance has no valid support, and that it has a powerful antidote which can end it. Therefore, we can eliminate ignorance from our mind stream. So when we as ordinary beings who have a very strong sense of grasping at some true independent existence, it's possible for us to have some compassion or faith which are afflicted. So certain experiences are not the case that they come because of our negative emotions, such as love, compassion, and so forth, but and because of that, they can actually infinitely increase, whereas love, attachment and anger cannot increase infinitely because they have an antidote against them. And therefore, the afflicted states of mind, because they have antidote, they can be eliminated, whereas the basic nature of the mind, which is its luminosity or clarity and awareness, cannot be eliminated through the meditation on the selflessness and so forth. And so this basic awareness nature is there, right? With the mind itself. And in Mahayana Tantra, it is said that the stains or defilements are temporary, adventitious, which doesn't mean that they were not there first and then all of a sudden they came. But because they have powerful antidotes that can counter it and eliminate it, they are said to be adventitious. Whereas the nature of mind being cognizant and clear is intrinsic in it. And those states of mind which do not have to depend on the grasping at some true independent existence of things can increase infinitely, and therefore understanding of selflessness and so forth also can increase infinitely.
다 얘기한다. 참을 기르와스. 돌아 펜셔가 사야되기. 아니 제가서 두부스. 자와스. 조부스. 당문소 샴페인게
in the Dignagas verse, the Buddhas are said to be also motivated by altruism to benefit sentient beings. So that shows that of the excellent courses bringing up or giving rise to a reliable person. So in the case of school children, of course, physical strength or physical exercise is one part of their curriculum, but mainly the children are taught the different subjects in order to get rid of their ignorance about the different subjects. And it's because this education of the mind and for knowledge is the one which can help in their life, not the physical exercises as such. And so the Buddhas do not help us temporarily by giving some material things and so forth, but to change, make transformation within ourselves. And therefore, how they make this transformation, cause us to transform ourselves, is by showing what are to be practiced and adopted and what are to be discarded. And therefore, in their action, they give teachings. And so if someone is not aware of what they are going to teach, not knowledgeable in it, then you cannot teach others as well. And so, moved by his compassion, the Buddha taught us the sublime Dharma to rid us of all distorted views. And therefore, the Buddha gave us teachings from his moved by his compassion. And similarly, in the case of other religions like Allah or Muhammad and the Jesus Christ and so forth, also gave their teachings out of compassion. Of course, the other founding teachers of other religious traditions have taught their disciples to be compassionate and loving towards others. Whereas when it comes to the Buddha, he qualifies as someone who rids us of all our views, distorted views. So, within this, the afflictions, there are those of, within the intelligence, there are the intelligence which are afflicted by the afflictive emotions, and then there are those which are intelligence which are not afflicted. And so within the afflictive emotions, the negative, disturbing emotions, there are those which have to do with views, and there are those which do not necessarily have to be based on views. And so, regarding our attachment and anger, of course, they do arise as a result of our negative, our fundamental ignorance, but they also go together with that ignorance. And so this kind of ignorance, or this negative, disturbing attitude must be overcome through our wisdom. And unlike using certain temporary counter forces to attachment and anger, for example, in order to reduce our attachment, we can sometimes meditate on those of the repulsive nature of our body and so forth. And so within the antidotes, there are the antidotes which actually counter directly those of the negative emotions. And then there are those which kind of which help in reducing our negative emotions. For example, when you meditate on loving kindness, it kind of reduces your hatred or anger. But these are not the directly countering antidote, but reducing them. And so we need to, in order to overcome our distorted views, which serve as the root of all negative emotions, in order to overcome that, we have that of the wisdom, realizing how things really are. And therefore, the Buddha is someone who taught us that of the dependent origination of things. And so when our Indian masters and so forth have praised the Buddhas, they pray in their writings, they do so by praising the quality of the mind of the Buddha. In the case of Master Nagarjuna, for example, in this verse, he says, I pay homage to the Gautama who, moved by his compassion, taught us the sublime Dharma in order to rid us of all disturbing, distorted views. And then he also praises the Buddha in the 60 stanzas of reasoning that the Buddha taught dependent origination. And so there's no other way to help sentient beings in order to do away with their ignorance, their negative emotions, other than making them understand the reality of things. And therefore, it is said in the sutra that the Buddhas do not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they take away the suffering of sentient beings, like taking out some thorn stuck in our feet or something, and nor do they shift their own realization into others, but by teaching how things really are, that they lead sentient beings to liberation, the path of liberation.
다다 더긴 진짜봐 뉴제 주 젠착니 교인 대인내전이 다음에 통한 개와 있는다. 너 전에 왔다 간다 얘네. 다 동행사들이 교가래요. 동행 컨디스 동행 교텔에는 컨디스 연구야. 아니 교대 딱 봐인데.
So what these lines show is that how suffering arises and what are the causes giving rise to suffering. And so this relates to the Four Noble Truths. So there's none amongst the 7 billion people who want suffering, but we cause ourselves suffering. Although nobody wants suffering, we cause suffering to ourselves, although we don't want suffering. This is we will not cause ourselves suffering because of wanting to have suffering, but because we are ignorant, we cause ourselves suffering. So we as human beings have this intelligence with which we can actually judge between what is the long-term goal, or long-term benefit and the short-term benefit. And we can actually see the pros and cons of things, but we still create lots of problems for ourselves. So this is because we are lacking in education of our transforming and increasing our ability to think positively, and we need education for moral ethics in our education systems, which doesn't mean that everybody has to be taught religion as such, but we need some education for our developing and cultivating this warm heart. So over 1 billion people in this world are non-believers. So while they are non-believers, they seem to also sometimes neglect these principles or positive qualities of human beings like love and compassion. So whether you're a believer or not doesn't matter. So from the perspective of the theistic religions, the non-theistic religious traditions and their followers are considered sinful because they don't accept the Creator God. Whereas on the other hand, the non-theistic religious traditions, from their perspective, they would say that the theistic religious followers of the theistic religious traditions are have fallen into the extreme of eternalism. So with regard to the wrong view, there is an exaggerated way of looking at the things, where they say that something that does not exist exists, and then there is a nihilistic view as well, where you say something that exists does not exist. And therefore, in order to understand the things well, you have to do investigation into the nature of things. So we need to understand what causes suffering and what are the counter forces to those causes, and therefore the Buddha is someone who shows us from his own experience what are to be practiced, adopted, and what are to be avoided. So because he shows the things from his own experience, he is the teacher. And then, with regard to being the Sugata, what is said is that there is this the cause which gave rise to an omniscient, the reliable person, and then in his action he helps others out of the suffering by giving them the teaching. And in order to be able to give such a teaching, therefore he becomes the teacher to avoid those of the negative ones and adopt the positive ones. And then with regard to the Sugata, which comes from the with regard to that, there is the state of purity of the mind from the negative emotions. So verse number 139 down. Numbering is different. Practicing the means to accomplish the purpose is accepted with the teacher. Since following the accomplishment of the two, compassionate intention, the teacher selflessness, the Sugata, favorable with personal, and ensued the former two said to be the causes. And then the verse 139, the cessation of the causes with the three qualities, indeed Sugata, the one gone to bliss. Since Sugata in the form of cessation is not the basis for suffering, it is well seized. It is due to seeing the selflessness, due to effort of the repeated familiarization of selflessness, which was seen already. And so, since the Buddha himself familiarized with the causes for becoming enlightened, he was able to show what are to be adopted and what are to be avoided from his own experience of having overcome all the negativities. And then so through this, he became an omniscient or the reliable person. And then next comes the explanation of the word protector in that of the Master Dignaga's salutation verse, where he says the protector, which explains how in through the reversal process of the Four Noble Truths, he became someone who is reliable. So with regard to that, this text touches on the Four Noble Truths, which is very important teaching of the Buddha. Sometimes we don't teach or explain much of the Four Noble Truths, but he was someone, the Buddha was someone who actually gave us the instruction on the Four Noble Truths, which are very important. So when we give teachings, we need first to introduce the disciples in about the true cessation and true path. And the true cessation, which has the attributes of being peaceful, cessation, which is that state where the Buddha has reached the point of having overcome all the negative emotions as well as the imprints left by them, and thereby becoming an omniscient one. And so that is our goal, the final goal represented or referred by the mantra of Heart Sutra, which ends with Bodhisvaha. And so once we understand the Dharma jewel, then we'll able to understand what the Sangha jewel is, and then also that of the Buddha jewel. And therefore, in Abhisamaya Lamkara, there is the instructions on the two truths, and then the Four Noble Truths based on that, and then into it goes into the three jewels. And So when we do our practice of taking refuge, it's not just enough to say, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and so forth, but we need to really understand what the Buddha refers to, what the Dharma refers to, and the Sangha refers to. I mean, the Buddha gave his teaching on suffering in the Four Noble Truths, not to tell us that, oh, if we do sinful actions, we'll be led into the lower realms of existence and so forth, but to actually create fear in us, but by introducing us to the reality of how things are. In order to understand that, the Buddha gave teaching of suffering and so forth. And in Tibet, we were really ignorant. Many people were really illiterate, and therefore the certain teachings were given on the basis of that kind of mentality of people. And to introduce Buddhism, we need to go through those of the Four Noble Truths. And so we need to actually understand the Two Noble Truths in order to understand the Four Noble Truths well. And therefore, to understand the principle of taking refuge, we need to understand the Two Noble Truths, two truths, the conventional and ultimate, and then on the basis of that, understand the Four Noble Truths, and then what is meant by the three jewels, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Kundo Sangpo Ten, Tishinde, the Takungi Chesu, Talo Chinkawa, the Datamja, Rabdongo, the Zunshim, Watamja, Mawakana, Dagi Kevets, or Tiku, Sambo, Chichi, Rabdongo. Temba Nuish in the Savat, in the Punushin, Temba Yurin. May I be moved by compassion to spread the teaching of the Buddha where it has spread before but not declined, and wherever it has spread before but declined, may I revive them.
Oh, yeah. See you again tomorrow.
So tomorrow, I will continue the teaching on Dharmakirti's Pramanavarttika, and then also do a ceremony for aspiring bodhicitta. So if you just generate aspiring bodhicitta, you don't need to pledge to engage in the bodhisattva practices, but what you need to do is pledge is to be a good person from tomorrow onwards. You don't have to be a Buddhist as such to pledge that you will be a warm-hearted person with warm heart and love and compassion. Even as Christians or other followers of other religions, you may still make such pledge. And before that, we'll see how it goes. Maybe I will also do the layperson's vows. And so bring questions for tomorrow. Don't ask me silly questions, please, but tough questions would be good.